Welcome to Class 5. In this class, we're going to focus on the topic of communication, getting your message across, and how to have an impact. In this class, we'll cover the following topics. First, why are communications so important for nonprofits? Second, what are the keys or secrets to effective communication? Third, some great examples of nonprofits with really powerful communications capacity that have changed the world. And at the end, I'll be giving you a reminder about the mid-course written assignment and part 1 of that course, which was due today. So why are communications so important for nonprofits? Well, there are many different reasons, so let's look at those. First of all, of course, clear communication helps build an understanding about the mission and purpose of the nonprofit and how it works and everything else about it, including its theory of change, which we covered in the previous class. And as we found in the previous class, the theory of change can often be quite complicated and difficult to communicate. So establishing clear communications about the organization is very important. For example, it's key that the staff in an organization understand what the organization is doing and why, and can communicate that clearly themselves. It's important that they understand what their role is, what they're supposed to do each day when they come to work, and why that's important. That's key for their motivation and for their retention in the organization and for many other reasons. Secondly, for board members and others who engage with the organization, who are advisors to the organization, they also must have a very clear understanding of the organization and what it does, so that they in turn can communicate to others externally, as well as to each other and with the staff. Communications with donors for fundraising purposes and keeping donors engaged and building their support for the organization is of course one of the most tangible aspects of communication, and many organizations have communications teams that are very closely linked to their fundraising teams, and they work very closely together. We'll be talking more about this in the next class on fundraising. Partners of an organization are key to its success in many cases, and so being able to communicate with them clearly and effectively is also important. Getting them excited, them wanting to be our partners, them wanting to share in the costs and benefits of the work that we're doing is extremely important. And then of course there are many other stakeholders as well. Usually communication is integral to a nonprofit's theory of change. Often the theory of change itself depends upon effective communication with specific audiences as part of an effort to change behavior. And we'll come to this later in the presentation when I talk about some of the other key aspects of behavior change, because communication alone is not enough. It can lead to changes in knowledge and attitude and behavior, but often only when mixed with other things as well. So we'll talk about that later. Communication and advocacy are also often tightly interwoven. An organization that's advocating for specific sets of changes will develop an advocacy strategy, and linked to that, a communication strategy to ensure that information gets to very carefully identified target audiences and has the impact that is desired. Communication, as I mentioned earlier, is a core component of fundraising. We'll be talking about this more in the next class. And more online fundraising is key, and how an organization communicates online is fundamental to its effectiveness as an organization and as a fundraising entity. Communication, unfortunately, is also very important when things go wrong, and eventually something will go wrong. There'll be an issue that needs to be explained what may often be euphemistically called a special situation, some kind of crisis or criticism of the non-profit, some kind of issue perhaps with disgruntled staff, or a genuine issue with mistakes that have been made by management, leadership, or other issues. And in this case, clear, rapid communications with integrity are vital, and in some cases vital to basically save the non-profit from extinction, as these crises can lead to dramatic impacts on the fundraising ability of the organization, its partnerships, and so on. So communications is absolutely central. But in my experience, communications is often underfunded within an organization. Often it's one of the first budget items to be cut when money gets tight. And perhaps that's the case because it can be cut without a dramatic impact on the organization in the short term. For some reason, the allocation of funding to communication within a non-profit can go up and down dramatically, while other parts of the organization seem to be quite protected from these kinds of changes. So this is something that we could think about more together, but don't make the mistake, if you're managing a non-profit, working for one, to put insufficient resources into the communications budget line. And as the organization grows, of course, to increase those resources. So let's look at some of the secrets or tricks or techniques of effective communication. And you can find many resources about this online, but I've tried to summarize here what I've learned over the last 25 years. Communication has been a very central part of my work, communicating with different audiences ranging from local communities of fisher folk on the coastlines of Indonesia right up to the White House itself. And basically the same techniques, tricks or secrets apply in most of these situations. So first of all, it's important to be really clear and specific about the changes that you want to make through communication. So this goes back to previous classes where we talked about developing a clear, concise, and easy to understand mission for the organization. We talked about impact, what impact is, and how we might measure it. And we talked about the broader theory of change, which brings it all together. Secondly, identify your audience very clearly and get to know them. Really understand your audience. Saying that your audience is the general public or everyone sets you up for failure. That's not how any effective communications activity can be run. You have to specify who it is you're trying to reach. And this can get really, really specific. We see this very clearly, for example, in political campaigns and political polling, so we get used to some of this language. But this applies to any type of communication activity. Are you trying to reach men or women? Are you trying to reach people in a particular location of a certain age? Are you trying to reach people who care about certain specific things or don't care about certain specific things? And by specifying it more and more, you can then get to know that audience, and you can tailor your communications to be as engaging and emotionally connecting to that audience as possible. Then you must develop clear, simple and compelling messages and media, videos and so on, that connect with that audience. And key to doing that is testing those materials with the audience. Testing them through quantitative and qualitative techniques that I think you're learning about in some of your other courses at Baruch. You can do focus groups, you can do surveys, there's all sorts of ways to do this. And it can be very informal, but even basic testing with a few people who broadly represent your target audience will really help you to hone and improve your message and your materials. You'll discover things that may be a complete turn-off to your audience that you had no idea. And you'll come upon things as you test different ways of messaging that connect with your audience, get them excited, get them engaged, get them emotional, which is the key to changing their attitude. What you may not realize is that who is doing the communicating is often even more important than what is being communicated, and we'll see some examples of that later in the class. So think about who your spokespeople are, or ambassadors, celebrities, local politicians, people who are respected and admired by your target audience, religious leaders, activists locally, people who are seen to have high integrity, people who your target audience trust and like. These are going to be your most effective vehicles to get across the message that you're trying to communicate. If you can afford it, if you do have the budget, then consider hiring communications professionals. As soon as a nonprofit grows to a certain size, it should have a core staff of communication specialists paid for full-time on the staff. And even in that case, they may still bring in consultants and specialists to help them develop specific types of communications materials or campaigns, such as specialists in building a Twitter following or specialists in preparing engagement with national print media, for example. These are highly specialized skills, and there are lots of professionals out there, particularly in the New York area, who can help you with this. If you're a small and relatively underfunded organization, then you may also be able to find people who are willing to do this sort of thing for you pro bono at no cost or at greatly reduced costs compared to their commercial rates. I will say that communications consultants do tend to be quite expensive, so this is something to also watch out for and be careful that you're spending your money wisely. Storytelling is given far less attention than it should be when talking about communications. Storytelling is absolutely the most effective way to communicate with other human beings. It's how we have communicated and shared information and learning with each other for many, many millennia. It was the only way, really, in which information was shared and passed down and remembered until the advent of writing and printing and so on. So for most of our history as a species, as communicators, stories have been central to how we relate to each other, how we build trust with each other, how we work together, and how we remember what our ancestors have learned and what we want to pass on to our children. And you'll see this in some of the writing that I've recommended for you for this course. So never underestimate the power of storytelling, and work to develop this as a personal skill and as a skill within your organization. Anyone can be a good storyteller. And then note that different media require different approaches and tools. And of course, online and social media now dominate communication. We'll have a little bit about that later on in the class. And those require very different sorts of techniques and materials and ways of presenting the information to more technical materials or funding proposals. And different types of donors, like small local foundations versus large international funding agencies, may also require very different types of materials. Let alone presentations and public speaking, a whole other type of communication that requires different approaches and tools. For each of these, there's a tremendous amount of advice, information, and free training available online. And often I found it most useful just to look for really great examples. For example, with presentations and public speaking, TED has literally thousands and thousands of wonderful examples of great public speaking for free on YouTube. Now let's take a look at social media. Social media are becoming more and more important. In fact, they increasingly dominate the way in which nonprofits communicate with broader audiences, unless it's with a very specific narrow audience that the organization is engaged with in other ways. It used to be that printed material and then websites were the basis for solid communications, together with things like events, press releases, working to build relationships with newspapers and television and other channels to communicate widely. Well, that's now all been thrown out the door. It's all still going on, of course, but social media has taken over. And the use of video has become particularly important. And that's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. It used to be that we were happy with a 5 to 10 minute video, then it was 2 to 5 minutes, then for a couple of years we tended to focus on 2-minute videos. These days it's less than 30 seconds or even less than 15 seconds. An incredibly difficult medium to work with to get your message across in such a short time, competing with so much other material out there, and connect with your audience in an emotional way. The good news is the only equipment you need is a good smartphone. A top-end smartphone will make a video that's comparable in quality to what we used to rent extremely expensive equipment to make. So this is now within the grasp of anyone, and small non-profits can use video widely to have the impact that they want to have. So while social media may look and feel and seem very different from more traditional media, in fact many of the same principles apply. Know your audience, keep the material short and clear, try to measure and get feedback from your audience on how you're doing, test the materials, use ambassadors, the right kind of people to communicate your message, who are going to be trusted and are going to connect with the audience. And then there are a host of other specific techniques for social media which you can learn about. And the link below, which I found online, I think gives a really nice, short but comprehensive guide to social media practices for nonprofits. There's a portion of it that's quite easy to follow and simple to learn, and then there's a portion that's more technical about the online world and how to ensure that your material is picked up, that it's linked to in the right way, that it's going to be picked up effectively in search algorithms and so on. But this is all stuff that you can learn, and any good nonprofit becomes expert in using these tools, techniques, and tricks. So let's look at some nonprofit communications examples, some good examples that I found online. So here are some really powerful examples. First of all, from Save the Children. And I'm pasting here the link to their website, and you'll see some videos within that website as well. So please click on that link or copy and paste it into your browser and have a look at the video. And I particularly recommend you to have a look at the video which comes up about children in Syria. So I'll just give you a second to click on that. I will pause while you take a look at that video. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at that now. You can pause this video while you have a look at that one. And what you'll see there is a really brilliant example, I think, of how the organization is connecting emotionally with its audience. The shocking images of war in Syria and giving you a sense of the suffering of the children in that conflict, but at the same time doing so without being inappropriately graphic, which would potentially be much too upsetting for many people in the audience and therefore lead them to go elsewhere online. So that's Save the Children. The animal rights and animal rescue organizations have worked to perfect these tools over many years. So let's have a look at the ASPCA's very emotional video. You can go to it here on YouTube, which is requesting support for animal abuse. So copy and paste that one, click it into your browser and have a look at that video. I'll pause for a second so you can pause this video while you do that. So that video shows really effective use of a celebrity ambassador, playing the music that the ambassador herself has composed and using, again, images that are extremely emotional to connect with the audience in a short period of time and immediately give a message for how you can help, at the same time without being overly explicit or upsetting of the audience. I'm sure this was tested very, very carefully. They probably had many different types of clips and footage that they used, and they settled on this as sort of being in the middle ground between imagery that would be too upsetting of animal abuse and imagery that inspired people, while the imagery that they're using inspires people to take action, stay on their website and donate. Here's another example from PETA, their Stop Selling Fur campaign, which was very successful. Here you see some slightly more graphic images on their website, so have a look at that and you can see how effective they were with that. I'll just pause while you take a look at that link. And finally, the Susan G. Komen organization, which has just some fantastic material here to inspire people to join them in their efforts to tackle breast cancer. So take a look at their website and have a look at the video material there, which you can see in the link. What I found most impressive about this and what would most inspire me to take action were a couple of things. First, they're very cleverly connecting not only with women but also with men in the audience. Breast cancer, of course, is traditionally and widely seen as a female issue, and I'm sure that most of the people who have connected and supported these campaigns and worked with these campaigns over the years have been women because of that. But it also, of course, affects men, both directly and indirectly through their families and loved ones and neighbors and friends. And this video, I think, does a good job of connecting with men. The other thing, though, I think even more important about this example is how they very quickly and immediately established their effectiveness as a non-profit by putting some very simple statistics up during the video. They show you immediately that if you give them money, it will be well used. It will help directly cover the costs of mammograms and treatment for women with breast cancer and other people, and that they're a big and important organization that's had a very measurable impact on this disease in the United States. So they're establishing their credibility and they're building trust with you as an audience member. And you see the skillful use of data and information presented very, very simply and very clearly on the video on their homepage to help make that case and make that connection with you. They're telling you if you donate money to them or join them in other ways to support them, they will use those resources well and it will have an impact. So let's look at a couple more examples just to finish up here. So first of all, the Red campaign by Bono and his organization, which makes efforts to combat HIV/AIDS. If you have a look at this video on YouTube, you'll see it's a really extraordinary example communicating the power of the impact that the organization has. A very positive message. In a few seconds, you can see how the lives of children and adults are changed by the work of this organization. It really communicates to you that you can trust them with your money. If you support them, it'll lead to very, very tangible changes in the lives of these people, particularly in Africa, and perhaps most emotively, the lives of small and sick children. And then there's the World Wildlife Fund, one of the leading environmental organizations globally. Here is a rather different type of video, and this one helps address a challenge that environmental organizations face in connecting with the general public and building support for their work. And that is the challenge that many people nowadays do not feel connected with nature. They do not feel that they depend upon nature. They do not recognize that they are part of nature. And this very beautiful, simple, graphic video just tries to dispel those myths and communicate the importance of those connections and even connect it back to their wonderful logo, the giant. Now, the source of this material is in this link here, and you can read a little bit more about this work by Deborah Davenport in this link. And finally, I encourage you to take a look at my own organization. Again, a different type of video on YouTube. This is a longer one, so this is the kind of video material that was very commonly used up until, I guess a year or so ago. We're now shifting to shorter videos, as I said. So this is a longer one for those who are more interested in the organization, that tries to create a subtle emotional connection through one of our staff and his very moving and deep and thoughtful work with farmers, with tea farmers and others, to address agriculture, poverty and climate change. So please click on that one or paste it into your browser, and you can let me know what you think later on in class. Now, communication is not sufficient, unfortunately, to achieve behavior change in many cases. And so I just want to touch on this aspect, that communication alone is not enough. What communication does, when we communicate with somebody, when we tell them a story, at the very least, what we hope it does is to change their knowledge, that we inform them about something, we give them some information that they didn't have. And if the communication is really effective, like many of those videos that we just saw previously from those various nonprofits, it won't only give information, it will lead to some kind of emotional reaction in the audience, or a change in attitude. So attitude changes from being one of not caring to caring about something, from not wanting to help to wanting to help, from not donating to the organization to donating to the organization. And that's a very much bigger step than simply receiving information and changing what you know or understand about an issue. And in addition to change the behavior of somebody, often it's not enough even just to connect with them emotionally, to emote a response. You also have to remove some kind of barrier to that change in behavior. So if you think, for example, about classic anti-smoking efforts, or efforts to promote good safe sexual practices among young people, it's not enough to simply connect with them, to communicate, to change their knowledge and understanding. You also have to remove the barriers to change. So in the case of smokers, it's also providing them, making it easy for them to access some kind of nicotine replacement therapy. In the case of sexual behavior campaigns, it's important to provide easy access to prophylactics so that young people can easily practice safe practices. It's not just changing the attitude, it's also a whole host of other activities that may need to go along with that in order to achieve the change that we're trying to have. And for a great example of an organization which actually I used to work for, which really specializes in the science and practice of behavior change, I encourage you to check out RARE, which is based in Arlington, Virginia. Here's their website. And you can download here the PDF to their Theory of Change booklet, which is very carefully presented. And there you get a great example of how an organization has used the science of communication and far beyond that gone into the science of behavior change to achieve changes in behavior of local communities all over the world to protect biodiversity and help those communities lead better lives, to improve their well-being and income. So take a look at that. I really encourage you to look at that material as a tremendously good example, one of the best examples that I know. Now, just wrapping up here, I want to make a small comment about the recommended reading, which I shared earlier in the week. And in that, I included at the top of the reading a book called Made to Stick by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. I really do recommend that you buy this book on Amazon. It's a book that you would want to read and reread and reread. If you're interested in how to be effective in changing the attitudes and behavior of other people. It's extremely well written. It's full of wonderful stories and examples. It's not very expensive. And it certainly had a very big impact on the way I think about these issues, even though I'd had lots of training and experience with this before I read their book. On the Blackboard, I have put a link to a short summary as well from the book. And I also sent out a 5-point guide to how to make great presentations, also prepared by these authors. So you get that in any case, but please go and get the book and enjoy it. I think you'll find it's really worth it. Finally, I'd like to give you a reminder about the mid-course written individual assignment that I set in class 4. So by today, you should be emailing your draft template theory of change and the accompanying narrative, a couple of pages or so, to the other students or student in your group. So today is the deadline for that. And you should be copying me on that so that I can see that you have done that. So I expect to get one email from each student with a copy of their draft material. Don't worry about the quality of it. The whole point is that this is a draft. As long as you've got something that's reasonably complete, I will give you some points for sending your draft on time. And then your colleague students in your group will have until next week to provide you feedback on that. And then you'll have a week to revise it and submit it to me. So the bulk of the score you get for this assignment will be on the final product. And you get some points along the way just for meeting the deadlines and completing these intermediate tasks. If you have any questions or problems with the assignment, please don't hesitate to email me at that same address. And if necessary, we can get on the phone and talk about it so that I can make sure you know what to do. Thank you very much. And see the materials on Blackboard, of course, for that midterm assignment for much more details. From the last class, slides 16 to 19 detail the assignment. Again, if you have any questions, please email me.